What's up, STS Nation, and welcome back. Unfortunately, it has been 38 days and counting, still no suspect or persons of interest named, no weapon to be found anywhere. The silver lining in all this, we've got two more phenomenal experts to break it all down for you. On the bottom of your screen, this time in more casual attire, looking like a bad man, is Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson, a retired Birmingham Police Department veteran with 27 years of experience in law enforcement. He also co-hosted Investigation Discovery, their series called Reasonable Doubt. And prior to that, you have seen him, if you ever watch TV, on A&E's First 48 Birmingham. He's also the host of his own podcast, the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast, and author of the upcoming book, The Case. I love that title. Above him, the man with the goatee, Peter Massey, started his career at the Hamden, Connecticut Department of Police Services, rising to the rank of detective. He retired in July 2003 after more than 20 years to become the training coordinator for the National Crime Scene Training and Technology Center at the Henry C. Lee Institute of Forensic Science. He is currently a professor of instruction at the University of South Florida at St. Petersburg. Couple quick programming notes. People have asked, you can find this not just on YouTube, but anywhere podcasts are found. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all under Surviving the Survivor. And please support us at Patreon. You just punch in Surviving the Survivor. As we do each time, as both these men know, a lot of times stories like this become whodunits. We forget the victim. So let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Zana Kernodal, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20. And now on to the latest news. Around 3 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, two investigators show up to the house, Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson. They were carrying a black case. They were inside for about 20 minutes. They were seen by media through the window on the second floor. They did not take questions. 38 days later, what could these investigators possibly be doing with a black briefcase?
I hate to speculate, but, I would suspect if they're back at the crime scene, the original crime scene, information is constantly rolling in cases like this. You're constantly getting updates, and there may have been something that was seen at the crime scene that may be related back to this crime. So, the only reason I could think of them kind of going back would be to either collect more evidence that they saw at the crime scene earlier that they may not have collected, and now more information that has come about that may be an important piece to this puzzle. They're going back to collect it and to see if it is in fact important.
For you, and when you were working as the sergeant detective, would you go back 30, 35 days later to a home? Do you ever recall doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember us going back to a home almost 3 years after the murder supposedly happened. You just never know what will happen in these cases. Now, is that evidence that if it is important and it was in fact missed during the initial stages of the investigation, as long as you can articulate that, you should be fine. But my thing would be how they articulate that piece of evidence and why was it missed during the first stages. But as long as you can articulate it, you should be fine.
And we're going to get through what I call the news of the day on this, and then we'll get to, there's some good viewer questions and comments as always. But sort of the newsiest chunk coming out today, Peter and I spoke briefly off camera, is this white Hyundai Elantra. The Bolo went out, I believe, 2 weeks ago now. Police were looking for a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. Well, the Eugene, Oregon police, which is a few hundred miles away, they say that at 5:19 on December 17th, a person was reported sleeping inside a vehicle. It was a Hyundai Elantra. Officers responded to the call. They give the address, 7th Place and Seneca Road. Contact was made. There was no further report. There's more to this, which we'll get to, but Detective Massey, Peter Massey, how critical could this be?
Well, if this vehicle can be linked to the crime scene, then obviously this is possibly a holy grail. Um, it being so far away, it may just be happenstance. There were something like 22,000 white Hyundai Elantras registered. So, we can hope that maybe there's some connection here. Um, it's going to be, again, days until we figure it all out.
Definitely days. It wouldn't be hours, Peter. You don't think?
Oh, no. We won't know for hours. We won't know for days. Investigators will know right away.
Okay. So it goes on here. There's a little more information. The police chief Fry of the Moscow Police Department again released some information today. This, though, coming from the Eugene, Oregon Police Department, they say that we have no information to indicate the vehicle is related to the Moscow, Idaho case. And just kind of went on saying if you have further questions to contact the Moscow Police Department. So, Chris, the question to you, what kind of contact right now is happening between the Eugene Police, Oregon Police Department, and the Moscow, Idaho Police Department?
Well, in a case so high profile as this, I've had cases that I've worked in. We had information that may be related to our investigation. And if it made sense, we would send investigators up there to contact and interview that subject ourselves. If there is nothing that is related back outside of that being a vehicle that matches the same description, if there's nothing that relates back to this vehicle or to this person, that subject would be interviewed by the initial investigating agency, and that information would be relayed back to the Moscow Police Department. There's always a cooperative effort between law enforcement agencies when there's a case this big, and that will always the information will always be relayed back to the initial investigating agency, which is what's happening with this case, I'm sure.
But if there's any inclination that it could be something, Detective Sergeant, you wouldn't hesitate to get in a car and drive the whatever many hours it is to make sure it's not something you need.
There wouldn't be a second's waste of hesitation. Those two investigators or three investigators would be in a vehicle or on a flight on their way to wherever it was that needed to be, where this person needed to be interrogated or interviewed.
Okay, and so Peter, we heard from the Eugene, Oregon side, and then we heard from the Moscow Police Department, who say that, and this is in quotes, "We're aware of an abandoned white Hyundai Elantra found with no license plate and front end damage after it was reported to be found on the street corner." Photos, they say, of the abandoned car have been circulating online. Now, Eugene police told Law and Crime, a media outlet, that they are working to impound the vehicle. And then the state PIO, or public information officer for Idaho, for the state police, came out. His name is Aaron Snell, and that was late this afternoon, and says that this car belongs to someone in Colorado and would not say if there was any connection to the Moscow murders. Peter, I assume if there was a connection, they would be keeping it very close to the vest, and they'd be kind of playing that game right now, especially on the part of a seasoned PIO for the state police in Idaho.
Absolutely. Look, we've had, you said there's 38 days in this case with minimal information coming forward. There's nothing to expect that unless this is an immediate gratifying answer, this is not going to be played out anytime soon. And they're going to follow along with, as they've been doing, keeping it close to the chest until they decide that it's the time to release the information.
And Detective Sergeant, is there anything to make or read into the fact that it was found with no license plates specifically and front end damage? Does that raise any alarm bells for you?
No, it doesn't. I mean, look, we could look into it and guess as much as we want to, but look, there were 22 1,000 of those vehicles that the FBI said had been released or registered. So no, I wouldn't draw any real conclusions from it not being a tag or anything on it. I mean, but it could be, like Peter said, it could be the holy grail of information. That could be the close of this case. We just never know. You just kind of have to do like we've all been doing, keep an eye out on the news. And I'm sure when this case is brought to a point of arrest or more information, they're going to release whatever they can. But they've been doing a very good job of keeping information closed in this case. There's a lot of information that I would expect for a police department that hadn't seen a homicide in 7 years. I would have expected there to be a lot more information out, simply because this is something that they just hadn't done in years. But the Idaho Police Department, they've been doing I'm sorry, the Moscow Police Department, they've been doing a pretty good job of keeping that information closed in. And this, like I said the first time I was here, there is no reason for information to be released in the public, because when you start an investigation, you should always start it with the end in mind. The end in mind is prosecution. The more you release information out, the easier it will be to defend this case.
Interesting. Some other information that came out not long ago. The Moscow, Idaho police chief basically offered up the information that the command team, because they've been criticized, has 94 years of combined experience, and went on to say, and this is a quote, "Be assured this investigation is the Moscow Police Department's. I am the chief, and we're going to follow through with this." Peter, what do you make of him throwing out that number of 94 years of experience? And is it, and I apologize for this expression, but a little bit of a small man's or Napoleon complex going on here, where he's the little guy, the little agency saying that, no, we're okay, we can handle this?
Look, law enforcement is very egocentric. And when you start to get more brass on your collar or epaulets, that ego starts to work a little bit more. We also live in little fiefdoms. He is the chief. He is the head dude for this community. And, he wants people to know that they are there. And I'm going to guess with the understanding that they can reach out to the Idaho State Police, the FBI, the ATF, or any other agency that may give them or may be able to help them in any way, shape, or form. That said, again, the 94 years, does it mean much? Like Chris said, you haven't had a homicide in 7 years. So what does that 94 really tell you? You did burglaries and robberies and larcenies and maybe some sexual assaults, but no homicides. So, 94 years is maybe misguided of sort.
And then, Chris, if I can get your response. So this came out, that comment was basically in response to more information that was released, ironically enough, by the Moscow Police Department, where they said the main investigator handling this quadruple homicide has 2 years of experience within the department. That's not to say just 2 years, but within the department. This came out from a gentleman named Shannon Gray, and Shannon Gray happens to be the new attorney for the Gonzalez family, for Stephen Gonzalez. We talked about this last time. Stephen Gonzalez, the father of Kaylee Gonzalez, has had quite a bit to say. The attorney says that he emailed the department asking for credentials of the officer and why he's the lead, but never got a response. Does it sound to you like this attorney is already positioning some sort of litigation before the bodies, the homicides even solved here?
I would hate to think that, and I still feel the same way as I said earlier about the Gonzalez family. They're coming from a place of hurt. They want to find out as much information as possible, and the department is not giving them that information. And with good reason, I understand their reasoning behind not giving information out. It's just the way we operate. It only makes it easier for the suspect or the perpetrator of this crime to avoid arrest when we release too much information. So, and I would hate for to suspect that an attorney who's representing a family who's gone through one of the most horrendous times in their life to already be preparing for a potential lawsuit against the one group of people who are there to speak for his daughter, because they'll have to speak for his daughter when this person is arrested. So I would hate to suspect that that's his entire reasoning behind what he's doing. I think he's trying to. I would hope that the reason why he's gathering this information is to help quail a family, help to make them feel a little bit better about what's happening. That's the way I'm going to look at it. Uh, but there are attorneys. We know that there are attorneys out there that are chomping at the bits to enter into a lawsuit with a law enforcement agency, because most agencies will settle out of court. It'll be an easy win for them. But I'm hoping that the reason why he's seeking this information is to help his family feel better about what's happening, because they are in a very, very, very emotional time of their lives, and they will never be the same as they were before these homicides happened.
To that point, Detective Sergeant, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out you're a guy with a big heart. When you were working your homicides, did you have the time or make it a point to connect with the family? You know, Sort of emotionally let them know you're on the case, that you're working to solve it. Did you take these things personally to a degree when you know that the families are suffering so much?
Absolutely. The case that I write about in my book, the connection that I and the family have in this case, we're still friends today. As a matter of fact, I went out to lunch with my victim's brother just days ago, just a few weeks ago, just to meet up with him and talk to him. So yeah, I've been in those shoes. I've had family members who have been victims of murder, and when I was in the homicide, when that murder happened, when my family member was killed, we didn't get a good feeling from the law enforcement agents that worked our case. We didn't get a good feeling. So I always went into my homicide investigations knowing that eventually I'm going to have to speak for these families. So I should know as much information as I can about them. I should know. I should almost become a part of the family. They should be completely comfortable with everything that I'm doing in their investigation. Because look, I'm going to have to speak for your child, or your son, or your brother one of these days, and I want you to always feel comfortable with me in working your case.
Detective Massey, I'm curious your thoughts on that too, because you were in that same boat as an investigator.
Look, you always want to maintain some sort of contact with the family. And one of the things, coming originally I'm from Connecticut, and one of the things that we did in Connecticut is we established an office of victim advocate. So there were people who liaised between law enforcement and the families, um, that are trained in how to deal with people who are, like Chris said, dealing with the worst possible day in their life, and for the horrors to come after that. As law enforcement, we get some training in communicating with people, but not to the degree that people would like to think that we do. So to reach out to experts who can liaise between the two is really the way to go. But we also, outside of that, we also reached out to family members.
Yeah. I found the same thing as a reporter. It's really hard to separate, when you're covering, you kind of have to. Sandy Hook comes to mind. I covered that, and it's just so hard to, not step aside and have a conversation and be a human being. But I also think that's what leads to better law enforcement officer, and also to being a better journalist. Go ahead, Chris.
And let me jump in on that. And I absolutely agree with what Peter's saying. We had those same experts available to our victims when I worked with Birmingham. We had people that could go in and speak with them, but there is nothing like having that investigator that's working on your child's case to come in and on a weekly basis. I would set up like the case that I wrote about. We set up weekly phone calls with my victim. My victim's mother would call me every Friday at 12 o'clock. I remember that because there would be times that I didn't want to answer the phone because I know that I'm going to have to tell her the exact same information. So about 3 weeks, I'm sorry, 3 weeks goes by. I don't answer the phone call every time she called because I just didn't want to keep telling her the same thing. So she finally calls me back and says, look, detective, I just need I need to hear your voice. I need to know that you're still working on my child's case. Now, in the Idaho, and from there on out, I talk to her every week. No, ma'am, I don't have anything, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know. Now, in the Idaho case, there's a different set of circumstances because now you have 4 families that you have to contact. And there are 4 families that you have to constantly stay in contact. If you do it the way that I work cases, you have to constantly stay abreast of information. You have to constantly keep them updated on the information that you're finding and keeping them abreast of what's happening in the investigation. That's a lot. That could be an entire day of just phone calls that you're making to family members. Now, a lot of people say, well, you should dedicate a day to working, contacting the family members, but it's impossible. You have to work that case. So in a case like this, where there are multiple victims' families, I can understand them, not being able to have that contact like I like to have with my victims. I completely understand it. But different departments work in different ways. So that's the reason why I work cases a little bit different. That's just the way that I work them, but I understand the way that they're operating now because that's a lot. That's a lot. You don't have a day that you can just sit down and just make phone calls. You don't have that much time.
And you
No,
make
but
a great point. Go ahead, Peter.
if you have to do all of these things that we've just been talking about while walking that very thin tightrope by, again, not divulging too much
Mhm.
information or
Mhm.
inappropriate information to the families. So it's a very, very delicate balance between maintaining contact, providing them information, but not giving them that information that may come back to bite the investigation.
Mhm.
Agreed and totally understand. On to some video. In just the last couple of days, before we get to the specifics of these videos, I'm going to walk you through. Um, Detective Sergeant, do you have a theory as to why suddenly video, which police say they've had since I think week 1, is bubbling to the surface, and there's 2 videos that we'll walk through. Is any thoughts as to who would be leaking this or why it would be suddenly out there?
That's part of that's part of what I would expect to happen from a department, that has not they don't have the experience to well they've not had it, they've not experienced. I won't say that they don't have the experience. I will say that they've not experienced working a homicide in 7 years. You'll have a line and especially a homicide investigation this large scale. You will have information that will leak out. There will be multiple groups of investigators, not just police investigators, but forensics investigators and state investigators and county investigators that have information that's been shared. And sometimes that information will be leaked. That's just to be expected. Now, what's going to happen is it's going to come back and bite them in the hind ends when it goes to court. Because I guarantee you, a defense attorney that's worth anything as an attorney is going to take that tiny bit of information and build a wall around his or her defendant. Because
Is there
that's how these cases happen.
Is there ever a time when law enforcement would leak video to try to pull out a suspect potentially? Peter, you're shaking your head.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
If you go back to the DC sniper case,
Mhm.
Chief Moose perfectly sent out just enough information
Mhm.
each and every news conference to roil up the two folks who were convicted in that case. And here you had somebody who wanted notoriety. He wasn't getting it. Chief Moose sent it out slowly. The guy tripped over himself, made a mistake. Law enforcement pounced. Case solved.
Mhm.
Wow. And who can forget that? I remember watching those press briefings every day, and they went from the West Coast all the way toward DC. That was a scary case for sure. So the two videos in question, the first one, and let's call it the Adam video, right? So Moscow police say that they've identified and are speaking with a man who two of the victims referenced by name in a surveillance video hours before they were murdered. Investigators said this person is cooperating with police. It's not clear what the two girls' possible connection to this individual is or who the girls were talking about at the time. So this is like a snowy night, as is every night in Idaho. It looked chilly, and they're walking with someone, and they're talking about a guy named Adam. Adam allegedly is the bartender, according to multiple reports from the corner bar, which is where they were hanging out. But to you, Chris, Detective Sergeant, how critical again is video, and do you make anything of this specific video?
You know, look, that it, just like Peter said, we could you, you could draw that this may be a leaked information, but we've done it hundreds of times. Leaked a little bit of video to help kind of get the suspect moving around. Hopefully, that person will make a mistake. But I don't draw any real conclusions from anything that's been done until this person has been arrested. Once you see the person responsible has been arrested, you'll see how all of this information lines up. They'll start releasing some information. I'm sure they'll have to answer more, and they'll have to give more answers to information through the reporting now, because all of this has to line up. You'll have to line it up as an investigator. I can see why they're doing some of the things that they're doing. Some of it I don't understand, but that's because I work cases a little bit different.
And Peter, to you, what if this video is being leaked, but it's not being leaked by law enforcement and just, I don't know, potentially cyber sleuth, someone who somehow got their hands on it? How problematic is that if law enforcement doesn't want it out there and it's suddenly made available to the public?
It could very well inhibit the investigation. Look, there's a reason why law enforcement is doing what law enforcement is doing, doling out bits and pieces of information. If somebody else from the outside has released information that may compromise the investigation, that doesn't help law enforcement. Look, we all want to get this case solved. And by people talking and by people putting out information and people putting out information that may not be accurate, just hinders the investigation and law enforcement. So they're not going to be able to do the job that people want them to do. So it's not a good thing.
So there's other video that just surfaced and bubbled up to the public, and this video comes from September 1st. It's party video. You see the Moscow, Idaho police. They're called to a house. It's body cam footage on September 1st for a noise complaint. You hear music and partying when the officers first walk up to the home. Two men open the door. They tell officers no one inside the house where all the partying is going on actually lives there. And police eventually get Maddie Mogan on the phone. You hear her spell her name, Madison May Mogan. You hear her voice, which is eerie, considering just a couple months later she's going to be murdered in that home. But Detective Sergeant, what about the fact that on September 1st, there's this what appears to be a big party. The residents of the home aren't there, and people are just freely walking through that house to the point that police come out. what does it tell you about the home and the fact that a suspect could have potentially cased that house ahead of the crime?
I mean, look, all thoughts are open when you have a house like that. And for me, from an investigative standpoint, I see things a little bit different than most citizens would see it. To me, seeing that they've to me, it tells me that they're doing their background work on the victimology that belongs to these families. So that tells me if they're going back and finding all the calls, it's telling me that they're doing their due diligence because, like I said, that's going to come into play when the case goes to court. That they're gonna ask, "Oh, did you not know about the party? Did you not know about the one of the victims in this case called in to law enforcement?" And if you can't answer that question, if you can't articulate the information, then it's gonna look bad for you when you're on that witness stand. So yes, does it look bad from a citizen standpoint, looking out on the outside, looking in? Yeah, okay, it was a party house. They were college students. You know, I went to college. I had a lot of had a lot of times where there were people inside of my dorm room or in my house that I didn't realize that they were there. It's a college house, so that's to be expected. But what it says to me is that the Moscow Police Department is going back and doing their due diligence on this investigation.
It's curious. You say that you kind of see things through your investigative lens. This has absolutely nothing to do with anything, but it's my show, so I can ask you. I'm curious to both of you. When you go to the mall, let's say we live in a crazy world, mass
Mhm.
shootings, things go on. There's perpetrators out there. So, Detective Sergeant, when you take your family to the mall, are you always? I mean, I assume you always have situational awareness, but you're looking at the world differently than a normal person? And does that happen on a daily basis?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And with immediately, yes. So there are times where my family, when we're at the mall, especially when my kids were younger, my kids are all grown now, but I would never walk with my family through the mall. I would always let them walk in front of me. They always walked in front of me. That way, I can keep an eye on them, and from my peripheral, I can see everything else that's happening. If we sat down for dinner, we have to, and I do this now. Anytime I sit down for dinner, I'm always seated in a tactical position to where I can see what's going in the front, what's happening in the back, and my all of my surroundings. I never sit in the tables that are in the middle of a restaurant. I always sit in a corner somewhere. And if we can't have a corner seat, I'm not eating at that restaurant. It's gotten that bad. But I mean, these are just some of the things that I have learned and I've trained myself to do. And it's only because I've been in law enforcement for so many years. I'm always armed, and I would love to one day go into a restaurant and not have to worry about these things, but I can't do that. This is the way I've been trained. So no, I always have situational awareness. I would expect, I hope that everyone is aware of their situations because that is one way that we can cut back on having victims in our society.
And I think we should dedicate a show down the road to that. I think it'd be interesting. But Detective Massey, I'm curious. Same thing with you. You always have your eye out.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always looking to see where the safest place to throw my family should something happen, the quickest way to get them out of harm's way. Like Chris, my back is never to the door. Always constantly looking around when I'm out. Chris let his family walk in front. I did the same, but my head is turning almost 360 degrees, looking left, right all the time, just like the Secret Service does with the police or with the president. Um, we're trained to be aware of our situation, to be aware of what's around us, and I don't think that ever. I've been out now 20 years, and I still look at license plates. So it's just who we are.
I'm going to start going up to corner tables and saying, "Hey, are you a cop?" A couple more bits of news, and then we'll get on to viewer comments because people like to hear their questions answered. I thought this was interesting. This was reported about a neighbor in Moscow in a local television report, and says that Debbie, I won't mention her last name, even though they listed, she owns an apartment building near where the crime happened. This is actually according to Law and Crime again. She says that Moscow police have access to their video surveillance system and receive video from their system a day after the murders that showed a light colored car driving fast on Taylor Road around the time of the murders. She goes on to say that how the car was moving and speeding. And she ends by saying police and the FBI intended to analyze and enhance the image. The reason I bring this up is people have been very critical. Oh, the police didn't get video. They waited. Some video expired. This woman right here is saying that they got her video within a day of the crime. So again, Detective Sergeant, it goes to the point that we don't know what we don't know, and law enforcement probably has a lot more than we think that they do. Is that right?
They always do. Look, you'll never know every nook and cranny of information that they have. There have been cases that I've investigated where I had so much information that, I would have bankers' boxes of information, and the news media or defense attorneys would have, they would have this information, all access to them, but they would only put, focus on one piece of information, that information that, something that you didn't do. Like I told you the last time I was here, it's not what you did, it's what you didn't do. So no, you'll never know how much information law enforcement has. The only person that will know every bit of it is that lead investigator. Not even the FBI or some of the other state agencies or government agencies. They won't know every bit of information that you have. I'm sure they're sharing some information, but not all of it. They're not. I mean, it's way too much information to have. But the video evidence, if I'm correct, the FBI were the ones that created the website where they could upload all of the video evidence, that people could upload that video evidence into their system so it could be looked over by FBI agents. So I'm sure they know about the video evidence, but they won't know every single bit of information that's found in these cases. It's just way too much information.
Peter, you brought up an interesting point earlier about, when the chief announced how many years experience, you said these are all little fiefdoms. And the detective sergeant just mentioned competition. Is there a competition between the jurisdictions? Hey, we're going to solve this first. Does that go on, or is it really we're working together? Or secretly, does Moscow want to be the ones to break this case wide open?
Well, I think secretly they'd want to break it open. That we all would.
Yeah.
We all would. Chris was talking about who's going. The other person who's going to know it. The guy who's going to write the book.
Mhm.
That's who's going to know all the information. But to what you just said, look, there's so many crazy things that happen in all of these investigations, and it wouldn't surprise me that when it's all said and done, well, let me back up, because I want to say one thing. When you talk about amount of evidence and are they doing their work, we know that there's over 100 pieces of evidence at this point. They're going to be lucky if 15 or 20 get into the courtroom. Mm-hmm. So, you say that they gathered this plethora of information. All of it may be useful, but only some of it is going to move forward. The other thing I wanted to add, say this the last time I was on, is there have been a lot of studies done. It wouldn't surprise me that the police department has a good idea who may be responsible, but they can't, at this point, get that link to make the connection, to give it that tidy bow for the prosecutor.
Is that a DNA link, you think? Is that a DNA link?
It could be a DNA link. Yeah. It could be a fingerprint link. It could be something on that video. It could be that white car in Eugene, Oregon. We just don't know what it is at the moment.
If they do have a suspect, this is This makes Chris nervous, I know. But if they do, is there 24-hour surveillance on that person right now, Chris?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's 24 hours. I mean, yeah, he's not going to the bathroom without somebody watching him. You know, there was once a time that, we didn't have the manpower in order to conduct this surveillance, 24-hour surveillance. But now, with all of the technology that law enforcement has, with all of the manpower that have been dedicated to this case, you better believe there's a group of marshals or someone out there that are out there watching every. If this person is a person of interest, you better believe that there's 24-hour surveillance on him, his family, anybody that's connected to him. And that's just the way cases like these have to be done. If they have a suspect and he's a viable suspect, you better believe that he is being watched 24 hours a day.
And Chris, I made the mistake that you didn't and had kids way too late. So I just took my 3-year-old, which can be torture, but I love the kid, and I took him to a holiday parade.
Yeah,
And the only people he wanted to hang out with were the cops, the police
that's a good.
officer.
It's a good
He
kid.
loves them. Yeah,
You're
loves
doing
them.
right.
Yeah. But so it's, police work can be glamorized, but you're talking about staking someone out in surveillance work. How tedious can that be? You're just sitting in a car sometimes for hours on end, right?
Oh my gosh. So let me just I'll give you my own example. I had a guy that I had been looking for a couple of weeks, and this is me as a lead investigator. Before we had the Marshal Service and all of these fugitive units that were attached to the homicide team, we had to go out and do that stuff on our own. So I'm sitting in my car. I got one of the 1984 box Chevys, the detective cars that we used to have, and I'm sitting in my car, and my heater is out, and it's in one of the most drug infested prostitution area. Prostitutes are knocking on your window. You're having to urinate in bottles and things of that nature. You got about 3 or 4 bottles in the back of the car with caps on them and hoping they're not spilling. So you talk about the tediousness. That is the most tedious. Yeah, and for a guy like me that's constantly go, 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 having to sit inside of a vehicle is something that I hated, but it's something that you have to do in order to bring your suspects into custody. So yeah, I've done it plenty of times. It's not the most glamorous part of the job. Like I said, you're sitting in the car with bottles of urine in the back seat, but that's just something we had to do, and it takes a certain individual to be able to do those cases like that. I wasn't the one for it, but I had to do it.
Well, a touch more news, and we're getting on to the comments and questions. So this is actually an email I got from someone who is local to Moscow. I'm not going to give out the name for obvious reasons. But they write to me that the area is small. They wanted to give me like some context and said that the shock to the community was just absolutely enormous. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. But then basically says that the biggest question this person has and others in Moscow is really motive. And went on to say that this was obviously very well organized, never thinking that something like this would happen in their town. So Detective Massey, Peter, to you, we haven't heard much about motive. I mean, if this is a serial killer, the motive is probably to get off on it, right? Would there be another motive?
I don't think that it's a serial killer. When I was on last, we had spoken to a profiler, and the discussion started there, and we kind of veered away from that. It does not appear to be a serial killer, at least in our opinions. It sounds like, or seems like, this is more a retaliatory kind of a thing, an anger kind of a thing. But again, we're gonna have to wait to see, what pans out. Do I think there's a threat to the community? I don't necessarily think there's a threat to the community. This appears to be somewhat targeted, more so than not. When, and again, law enforcement thinking this is not an organized crime. The viewers keep thinking that this is very organized. this was well thought out and well planned. Yeah, it may have been premeditated, but not so well thought out that you had other people in that house. So I'm not so sure. Again, our perspective is this is a disorganized scene, not organized.
And Detective Sergeant, I may have asked you, because I've asked a few people this question. Is there any chance in hell, if you had a college age daughter who was going to the University of Idaho, that you would have sent her or even a son back after Thanksgiving?
That is an extremely hard question to answer because my current job is I'm the chief of police at my alma mater. I'm the chief of police there, and a lot of these kids that are there, those are my kids now. These are my kids. So, uh, you know, that would be a I'm going to ask my child and take their advice because look, you can't punish your child or you can't punish a school for this happening. I don't think that the school had any involvement. I don't think the school was a target or I think that these young ladies were the target, or one of the young ladies was a target, and a couple of those victims were just kind of those the ones that were on the outside. They were at the wrong place at the wrong time. So as far as your question goes, me personally, what I want to see, would I be hesitant in sending my child back to school? Absolutely. That's me as a father. But I'm going to talk to my child and see what my child says and follow their lead. And look, I'm going to follow my own child's lead. I'm not going to just rip the opportunity for them to go to a school that they love because of something that happened that the school has nothing to do with.
You'll just be doing surveillance with as you're armed in a vehicle nearby.
Absolutely. I can find the old 84 Chevy and get me a couple bottles and we're going outside. I can spend a couple weeks down there,
Your kids just won't know you're at school with them.
They
All right.
won't.
So it is time once again for viewer questions, comments, and tweets. The first one is unintentional, but I had her on the show the other night. She is sharp as a tack. She is former retired FBI agent Jennifer Koffendorfer. She's doing quite a bit of TV. She tweeted out today, I guess in response to someone tweeting at her, case is in all caps, not cold. It's red hot in all caps. With evidence pouring in for subpoenas, warrants, lab results, Elantra leads, video review, etc. Hoping video puts people at ease regarding the hoodie guy. Law enforcement even says they're seeing a pattern regarding the Elantra. Now that's important. Detective Massey, Peter, do you agree with your assessment that it's red hot and not cold?
Oh, absolutely. They are still humping on this case left and right. This is far, far. The only thing that's cold right now is the temperature around the country.
Yeah,
This case is definitely not cold.
It's even cold in Miami. I don't want to rub it in, but I was complaining to my wife. It's in the 60s today with a little rain. That's like that's dead of winter here. I don't leave the house. Next one for you, Detective Sergeant Anderson. This one comes from Nerdy Addict. To be honest, what the F is Moscow PD asking us about the Hyundai Elantra for? They're the ones with access to all the traffic cams, DOT cams, public transit cams, including bus cams. They got FOTUS Duelist from the school bus cam. What the F are they doing? FOTUS Duelist, for those who don't know, and I think Peter would know this. I think he's from Connecticut.
Yes, sir.
Killed his wife and was caught on surveillance camera. I cover a case in Florida. The Dan Markel murder was an FSU professor shot twice, murdered by hitmen. They found him in part, his killers in part because of bus surveillance video. But Detective Sergeant, is it aggravating that Moscow PD is asking about the Hyundai Elantra, and then at the same time, people like Nerdy Addict are dropping the hammer for asking for information?
One of your biggest assets in an investigation is the public. The public has eyes everywhere. So they would be, I would think that they were extremely inept in doing investigations if they did not ask for the public's help. You should always ask for the public's help in an investigation, no matter how much information you have or video evidence, because sometimes that video evidence will have to be corroborated by someone where in the public. So you have to ask the public's help on any of these cases. And I would think that something was wrong with the Moscow Police Department if they didn't ask for the public's help.
Chris, was there one reporter in Birmingham that you would go to when you needed the public's help, or did you have a few? I'm curious of that side of things, since that was my side of the business.
Her name is Carol Robinson. I'll say her name on your podcast because I love her to death, even to this day. She always had information. People were always constantly plugged into her. She would, of course, she would always ask me, well, what are you working on, Chris? You know, pull me to the side. Chris, you got anything you can share with me? And I, you know, early on in the investigation, I'm like, no. But Carol Robinson was always someone that was plugged into the streets. I love her to death, love her to this day. She's been an asset to the city of Birmingham. She's been an asset to news writing, and she doesn't get the notoriety that she deserves because there have been a lot of times where she's helped us close investigations with information that she's getting from just being out in the public, being out and talking to people, helping us guide us in the right direction. Now, she would always want something in return. She, you know, she wanted the scoop. So, you know, we tried to make sure that we kept her on our sides. But her name is Carol Robinson, great reporter, great writer, love her to death. She was actually the first person to do an article on my mother and I when I graduated from the police academy. So that's the reason why when I went to homicide, she and I were already good friends. I had been working with the department for years. So always kept, and there are several others. Fred Robinson. Oh man, I could name a whole bunch of news reporters that we always stayed in contact with because sometimes they are some of your better assets also.
Kudos to Cal Robinson. Maybe I'm always thinking of show ideas. The way you're looking for bad guys, I'm thinking of show ideas. Maybe we'll bring her on with you, Chris, and talk about how you played off with the media and she played, law enforcement to both do their jobs. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can contact her right now. I still have her cell phone number. She's now changed it in 20 years. So.
Tell her to come on Surviving the Survivor. We'll do it.
I got you.
This next comment comes in the form of a tweet. And this is in regards, Peter, to what we were talking about earlier with the chief of police telling you how many years experience. This person writes, such a weird obsession with numbers, overly trying to show how busy they are. 10,000 tips, 20,000 Hyundais, detail-oriented with 60 FBI agents, 12 of this, 5 of that. Everything is numbers. Just find the killer. Peter, your reaction to this? People can be cruel to law enforcement.
You can't find the killers until you go through the numbers, okay? You need tips. You need investigators. You need the public. You need everybody to be involved in this investigation. Bottom line, for those people out there that don't think that the law enforcement agencies are working hard, we just heard about the chief standing up there saying, I'm the chief. He's got a lot of pride in what he does. So he's going to want to try to solve this case. They're going to want to work hard. If the public doesn't think that, man, they need to go to Moscow, Idaho and watch them.
By the way, I did read at one point that the chief has something like only 1% of the chiefs in the United States have the training that he embarked on and received, I think, at FBI headquarters. I read that, whether that is true or not true. Peter, have you heard that?
So I'm going to guess that it's about attending the FBI National Academy. I don't know, Chris, what they've had over 100 classes already. And there's, multitudes of officers in these classes. They're only taking, upper echelon and those officers that they see potential in. It's not 1%. If they're talking about the NA, it's not 1%. It's more than that. It's not great, It's
Yeah.
not, you know, it's not 50, 60, 70%,
But it's
but
not
it's
one.
not 1%.
It's
Yeah.
not what you know.
On on to the next comment here from Canada on. This one's to you, Detective Sergeant. When discussing Adam, the guy in this video, the point is made that the police have cleared him. My question is, wouldn't that be an investigative tactic to divert attention of the media while also making a suspect more comfortable, thus allowing the investigative team to gather information or possibly work with a suspect? So could they be using someone as a diversion to draw someone else out?
Absolutely could. And it may be just that, just exactly what she said. Maybe this is a diversion to keep making more comfortable. It could be to draw someone else out. She's exactly right. There have been tactics. We've utilized tactics like that to utilize them all the time. I mean, and plus, just because law enforcement, and I think I said this because it's sounding kind of familiar in my head. Just because law enforcement says that we're clearing this suspect does not mean that the investigation will not lead you back to this suspect. It means that at this time, this person is not a suspect because there is no information or no evidence to charge him with this case. So there, at any point in this investigation, that mindset could change at the drop of a hat. And I want to kind of go back to something that you just asked Peter and talk about the chief of police giving out these numbers and things of that nature. The only reason that I can see him doing that is just to quell some of the anger, to make the public feel more comfortable in what they're doing. Where look, the public's only looking for this murder happened. Somebody needs to pay for it. Somebody needs to be taken into custody. Well, there is a lot that happens in between that time. I would ask that the public just, y'all be patient because cases like this take time. And we are only, we're 35 days, what under 40 days into an investigation?
38 days.
38 days, just under 40 days. So this investigation is red hot. There are way too many assets out in the public right now working on this case for this case to even be mentioned or even thought about being pushed over to the cold case file. So it's red hot. And last time I was on, I remember us speaking about how, right around this time is when some of that forensics evidence is now should be coming back. So that's going to add another level to the way that this case is being investigated. It's so much that's still out there that we just have to be patient. We have to be patient because every last one of us, anybody that's been interested in this case wants to see somebody brought to justice.
Chris is going to come back and do a show called The First 40 Days. Next comment is from Ruth Carter. And Peter, I think you talked about this just to flush it out a little more. Ruth Carter writes, wow, thanks for your interesting channel. Thank you, Ruth. This is a really messy and weird case. So many angles, questions. Each of the 4 students that were murdered had their own problems. So it's hard for investigators with so much to process and investigate to solve this case in a hurry, which is exactly what we're talking about. And she goes on. But Chris earlier on talked about, he'd like to stay in touch with family members. But now if it was a quadruple homicide, you got to stay in touch with 4 family members. Well, the same thing goes to the investigative side of things, right, Peter? I mean, we're dealing with 4 human beings that knew exponentially X amount of people. It's 4 times greater or maybe even more than that. So that complicates the investigation, I assume.
So remember back to, I guess it was high school or even middle school math, and you had those Venn diagrams, the circles overlapping the other circles. That's where we are here. Each one of those circles is an individual who was murdered. You take all 4 of those, they have a lot of common friends, but there's a lot of non-common friends or uncommon friends involved between the 6 people that lived in the house. So it complicates it even more because now you have many more players involved. Time. We got to interview all of the friends from each one of the 4. We have to investigate all of those people involved. each one of the four has a particular background that we have to investigate. So, yes, it's much, much more time consuming than it would be if it was just a single individual.
Few more comments, and then we'll let these fine gentlemen get to dinner wherever they need to be. This one comes from Devious 2. And this person writes, I don't think there's anything wrong with people discussing facts, rumors, or theories with the understanding that they're not playing with the same deck of cards as the investigators. Not that anything can be done about it anyway. I can't get behind harassing, accusing anyone, or submitting tips based on anything that is not firsthand knowledge. It's unfortunate that some people take it way too far. But to you, Chris, is there anything wrong with people discussing facts, rumors, or theories about this or any other case?
There's nothing you can do about regular citizens discussing facts or rumors or anything. But from a law enforcement's perspective, no, I don't think that you should be discussing anything. You shouldn't even be discussing the facts at this point because let's just, okay, let me give you the simplest example that I can come up with off the top of my head. Let's take the video evidence of the phone call that comes in. Not the video evidence that's just been released, right? Okay. That evidence is released. There are a lot of people that are inside of this particular house. Well, this murder happens. Law enforcement finds a fingerprint inside of that house that belongs to the person that's responsible for these murders. Okay. Had that video evidence had not come out, this person would probably say, well, I've never been in that house during the interview. I've never been inside of that house. But now this video evidence has come out and law enforcement knows that his fingerprints is in the house. And now he knows that this video evidence is out there. He could easily say, well, oh yeah, that fingerprint may have come from when I was at their house during the party in September. That's the simplest way that a person can explain away evidence that I can think of just right off the top of my head that would give a person that may be responsible a reason for his fingerprints to be inside the house. And he could say the same thing about his DNA if his DNA is found in that house. Now, there are certain spots in the house that he just won't be able to explain. But, if you find a bit of cast off from the suspect can say, oh, yeah, well, I was at their house back in September. I made a mistake and cut my finger. That's why information shouldn't be discussed. That's the reason why law enforcement try to keep as much information as possible close to the chest, because there's no way to corroborate evidence inside of a house if this person has already seen that they have this evidence. It's not magic. I would love to wave a wand and say that, hey, I'm a magician. I can make this evidence or solve these cases, but it's not magic. It's simple following of facts and being able to corroborate that information and the evidence that's found in the case. That's how you get to close on any homicide investigation. So that's the reason why police are keeping that information close to the chest, because it only helps the killer avoid arrest. And even after he's arrested, it will help him, only aid him in his prosecution.
And that's why guys go ahead, Peter.
If I could just tag on there. We want to keep it close. We don't want people to know, but every time that somebody comes out with possible scenarios, that forces law enforcement to stop what they're doing, and they may be doing the right thing, to now have to stop and investigate this idea, this premonition, this dream that somebody had, because that's what we're supposed to do. Investigate thoughts, investigate information. So it starts to take away from law enforcement from doing their job.
And I think the point Detective Sargent was making, which we hear more and more as we're going down this road, it's not just about solving the crime, it's about prosecuting the case as well. On to Perfectly Imperfect. Let's take two more comments. She writes, I would imagine it's probably a little more difficult because it's a college town. Younger people tend to not have as much trust in law enforcement and they don't have as much experience and understanding and the repercussions of not being fully honest about what they might not know or know. So, Chris, there's a big university in Birmingham. Is it tougher dealing with a college age crowd because they might not be forthcoming with law enforcement?
Yeah. So, there's this, when I was investigating cases, uh, when I was investigating cases, we weren't, it wasn't like it is now. It's much harder to get people to trust you in law enforcement now because of everything that's happening. And with the internet, with it making the world so much smaller, and people think that some of the things that happen involving law enforcement happens every single day in law enforcement, which that's just not the case. So it's much harder to get people to trust you uh, now than it was back when I was investigating cases. When I was working, that there again, the case that I wrote about, this student was a college student, and fortunately, it was pretty easy for me to go down. She was at a party earlier that night, but just minutes before she was murdered. It was pretty easy for me to go back down to that house, knock on the door, talk to the young ladies that threw the party, and within hours, she had everybody that was there at my office ready to be interviewed. I don't know if things worked that way now. Now that was back in the 2000, and I think it was 2010 when that case happened. But things have changed in that this 12-year span as far as the relationship between law enforcement and the public, and that's where we in law enforcement, we have to do a better job of gaining the public's trust and reaffirming that we're working for the public. I work for you. So yeah, and I mean, look, is it going to work? I think it can work, but we have to be way more vigilant and showing the world what happens in law enforcement every day. Use the internet as a tool that we need to help show the public, just like it's being used to create the divide between the public and citizens and law enforcement. We need to utilize it to help bring us closer together, and that's the only way that we can keep people safe.
If I may, I don't disagree with anything Chris said. The only thing I want to add is they may be a little bit more cooperative there because they may be running scared. And
That's a
if they're
good point.
running scared, they may be more willing to cooperate with law enforcement than what Chris and I have been used to in our careers in dealing with either victims or witnesses or even suspects.
Mhm.
Interesting. I lied. Two more comments. I want the last one is a good one to wrap on, but this one comes from Patriot Lady. The elephant in the room of the longer version of the latest video concerning at this gives you a lot of insight into how people cyber and internet people sleuths are looking at things. That's why I bring this up. So again, the elephant in the room of the longer version of the latest video concerning Adam are the cars in the background. Behind the girls is a dark car parked at an angle 3/4 of a block away. Then a white truck slowly passes by and pulls up next to the black car very closely, and it looks like they're talking, following the girls perhaps, hatching a plan, question mark. Detective Sergeant, you want to take this? I mean, the public is speculating, but are you, as a detective, I assume you are looking closely at the background of that video too to see if anyone is following, if anything looks unusual. But how do you determine that?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, the first time you watch a video, you're usually looking at, just targeted information. But after you've watched it, because I can guarantee you that the people that are watching these videos, they're not just watching it one time, they're watching it hundreds of times. The first time you're watching it what's right there in front of the screen. But the next couple of times, you're watching everything else that's happening in the corners of the video, up in the left and bottom hand corners of everything. So yeah, there are, and if there's something questionable, somebody should be documenting that, and an investigation should began on that portion. So just like the internet sleuths, that are looking at that information. Law enforcement is too. So yeah, they should be investigating that information because, like I said, if you don't, when it comes to court, it's going to come back to haunt you.
I got to tell you guys, I covered a gazillion stories. I've been on the road, and I used to get super tired, but just doing this, which is new, and doing it at the rate that I've been doing it and thinking about it, because I read everything now on this case, it is exhausting. I'm having like an outer body experience. So I cannot, because when Chris mentioned the video, I could see Chris like going to lunch with his buddies while he's working a case, and you're watching video on your cell phone, just looking at
Right.
like constantly, like you're
Yeah.
just living this, right?
Right.
24/7.
Yeah. Imagine being a part of this investigation. And it's exactly like you said. They're not just going home and can shut this stuff off or put it off to the side. These investigators are still going to dinner with their families, like we talked about last time I was here. They're going to dinner with their families, and they're looking over surveillance. And that I used to carry a notebook, and I would constantly go back through the notes that I had made throughout the day, so that for the next morning I go into work, I'll know where I need to start back off, or where I left off from the day before. They don't. If you're having an out of body experience with this case and you're covering it, then trust me, it's a million times worse for these investigators.
You know,
And
you used to carry the notebook. I'm sorry, Chris, you carry the notebook to read your notes. I
Yeah.
carried the notebook to put stuff down that was running through my head at night.
Right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because we didn't have cell phones back then.
No, you couldn't pull out your phone and type out a text message back then. No, we had the two-way communicators, but we had to write it down on paper. It was all written out.
All right, so the last question, and then we'll get final thoughts, comes from Kevin Ruggin. What are the chances this case goes cold? Peter, to you first.
As I said the last time I was here, there is no doubt in my mind, based on what the medical examiner has to say, that the perpetrator got injured, that there is DNA of the perpetrator in that house. It's a matter of, can law enforcement find it, and can the lab analyze it, and can we find somebody to match it? So no, I don't think this is going to get cold.
Chris?
I'm hesitant to say that it will go cold. I mean, and I agree with Peter. I feel pretty comfortable in saying that this person was probably injured or injured him or herself, while committing these murders. The only issue that I would see of how it goes cold, if this is a first time offender and there is no way that they have a sample of his or her DNA, that would make the case go cold. But as of right now, under 40 days in, this case is still piping hot.
It's funny. I read one comment that says the mother knows. My mother's always over my shoulder. I'm wondering
I
if she-
believe that. I believe your mom does know. I believe that we've been questioning the wrong people. She should be out there in Idaho right now handling this case.
Oh, I'm sure you'll get an answer right away.
She'll get an answer.
100%. So any final thoughts, Peter, to you first? Where are we and where do we go from here?
We are still, as much as the public thinks that 38 days is too long of a period of time, we are still very early on in such a major investigation. The only thing I would ask or would say is to have for the public, keep thinking, keep sending information. However, be patient.
And to you, Detective Sergeant, the final word.
I agree with what Peter's saying. Yes, we should. This case is still hot. The investigators are still working the case. You have to be patient. 38 days is not a long time, especially for a case such as this. But we all have to work together. That's the law enforcement officers, the federal agents, state and county agents. They're all working together. The piece of the puzzle that we must, all of those units need, are the public's help. So if you have information, submit it to the police department, and we all should pray that this person is caught very soon.
The man on top is retired Detective Peter Massey, now a professor of instruction at the University of South Florida at St. Petersburg. Peter, anything to plug on your end? You're writing a book, you have a TV show in the works. What's going on with you?
Now I am laying low, waiting for opportunities like this to share the knowledge.
Enjoying retirement. I love it. And the man below, I have a feeling one day soon we're going to be calling him Mayor Chris Anderson. What do you think, Peter? I feel like that's coming.
Absolutely.
I would vote for him. He's also the former host of Reasonable Doubt on Discovery ID. He also was on A&E's First 48 Birmingham, which is now changing its name to First 40 Days. He's also host of the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast and author of the upcoming book, The Case, for which I have ideas about how to promote already, Chris, because I'm always thinking, thank you guys. We have not the best host, not by far, but we've got the best guest in the business. We'll be back with another episode of STS, Surviving Survivor. Love you, America.